probably sit down. So when we do sit down, if you can't see us easily, do please move to a spot where you can. If you can't see, then we'll stand up, but with luck we'll get through it sitting down. If you need to go out to the loo, they're through the lobbies on the right-hand side. There are no fire alarms or anything planned for this evening. There are fire exits right at the back, and I suggest we go straight out through those and just we'll wait outside, and there are enough police officers here to make sure we're well looked after. The other important thing to say this evening is that this is being live webcast now, and I think we're probably live now. So this is available to anyone around the world to dial into and hear the discussion this evening. We'll see it's the first time we've done it, but thanks to the Essex Police team who've made that happen. I'm really grateful to them for it. This is new technology. We'll talk more later this evening about new technology. It's really important we do that. But for all of you here this evening, there are two things to say about that. Firstly, because it is being filmed and recorded and webcast, if you don't want to appear on the shots, on the television, what's the best thing? To move to one side, move right to the edges, which will be least in shot. Is there anybody who knows they definitely don't want to be filmed? Don't be embarrassed if you'd rather not. So, and then secondly, when we come to take questions, and I hope there'll be lots of questions this evening, that's the whole point of the evening. We've had a lot of questions sent in, so we've got some to work through, but your questions will be very important. In order for those who are watching on the webcast and on the recording, we must use the microphones. So there'll be two microphones. Just put your hand up, you'll get a microphone. Don't fuss about turning them on, they're all on all the time. The guys will make sure they're live as you come to speak. So don't worry about them, just wait a second or two for them to make sure they're ready to go. So that is quite important though, because if you shout out, or if I'm sure you won't, but if we get sort of questions from the floor without the mic, they'll simply be lost. So is that okay? So thank you once again, and I'll sit down and just make sure that you can see us. If you can't see us, then just, I think probably I can see almost everybody, so you can probably see us. I was slightly worried if we had a completely full house tonight, it'd be more difficult. So let's say a word about this evening. You'll have gathered, many of you I know and have seen before. I'm Nick Alston. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Essex, and this is the 10th of our, gosh, it seems extraordinary. This is the 10th of our police challenge meetings that we've had since I instituted them a couple of years ago. Lindsay Whitehouse, my deputy, is here with me, and the Chief Constable at Essex, Stephen Kavanagh. A key part of my role as Police and Crime Commissioner is to hold the Chief to account on your behalf. Every week I meet him more or less formally. Every 2 weeks I meet him very formally to go through a whole series of them. And of course, after doing that for the first couple of times, we realized it was an absolutely marvelous opportunity for you to ask questions too. And it's worked extremely well. We've been all around the county. We had the first 3 in Chelmsford. Since then, we've been to Southend, Colchester Grays, Whittam, Loughton, Brentwood, and tonight in Rayleigh. So it's good to be here. It's also a particularly important meeting tonight because just over a month ago, the Chief Constable and I announced a series of major proposals about policing in our county. And it's absolutely right and proper that you should be able to ask questions about those, and indeed through the discussions to help shape the plans for the changes that frankly have to be made. There are people here tonight, you'll have questions that you want to ask. We've also had quite a few questions coming in, some of them actually quite long questions coming in by email. So Lindsay will have those ready to put into the discussion as we go along. And as chair, I will give as many of you the chance as possible to ask questions. It would be quite helpful for me actually to know and don't be shy about saying this. If there's a question you'd like to ask, I wouldn't mind if you just put your hand up, so I know roughly if there are lots of questions. So if you intend to ask a question, if you just put your hand up, that's brilliant. Okay, thank you. So that gives me a feel for making sure that we do leave good time for those. It would be great when you come to ask a question if you could keep the questions, relatively short, or as short as you can, and it would be helpful to have questions rather than statements. But if there are important things to say, please do feel free to say them. But I may need to move things along if I feel we're getting stuck somewhere. But I'll try and make sure everybody has a fair crack. And we've talked about the microphones already. So, if we're ready to go, we're going to see a film first, just to set the scene for the transformation programme that's underway, and then I'll say a little bit more about how the evening will run. So let's get into it straight away with a film.
Facing some enormous challenges, keeping it safe tests us every single day. New technology not only gives us more tools to fight crime, it gives us new ways of engaging with the public. That, plus the need to find over £60 million, means we need to make some big decisions about doing things differently.
The challenges we face are easy to explain, but are difficult to fix. Demand for our help is increasing. 1,200 calls come into this room every day, from people with emergencies to people who have experienced crime or fear that they might, to people who don't know who else to call and want to hear from someone they trust.
But the crimes we're responding to are changing. You're more likely to be the victim of crime online rather than on the high street. There are 4 times as many incidents of domestic abuse as house burglaries. Domestic abuse, vulnerable missing people, violent drug gangs, and keeping young people safe from child abuse are our biggest priorities. We need to work really hard to tackle those crimes that cause the greatest threat, risk and harm, even if those crimes aren't the most visible to you or I.
If you call 999,
Essex Police Control, what is your emergency?
call handlers like Andy will assess every single incident. If the best way to help you is to send a police officer, we'll make sure they have all of the crucial information necessary. But the officer who responds won't be sitting in a police station.
Because those officers will already be out on patrol. I want as many highly professional police officers as possible. I want those officers with the skills to investigate all crimes, whether they're out on the street or behind closed doors. But I also need to make £60 million worth of savings over the next 5 years. That means there will be fewer officers available to me. The way that we work will have to change, and the reality is that no part of policing will be immune to those changes.
We have far too many police buildings. They cost £2 million a year just to maintain in their often poor condition. We need fewer police buildings, and they must be fit for purpose. And after all, it's our police officers and staff and not buildings that keep people safe.
Focusing on the highest harms is the best way we can protect and serve people in Essex.
New technology will improve how we help you, so we can be accessible to victims and communities where you are.
Essex Police will need to be leaner, and it will want to work smarter with partners and with the communities it serves, especially to protect the most vulnerable.
I know I joined the police to help people and to put criminals away where they can't harm you. I want to hear what you think about the changes we need to make.
So that sets some of the scene and the things that we'll be talking about tonight. And as it says at the end, we do need to hear from you what you think about the things that we're planning to do. We're going to, this evening, break the evening up. There'll be some discussions about particular topics followed by your questions, and we'll move on through those to a general question session at the end. So we're going to start by talking about the context, the financial context. Why are these changes having to be made? And a little bit more about the policing context. How is crime changing? Then we're going to go on and talk about the estates, the buildings, why the changes that we're making to police buildings, police front counters, the place where you can go and meet the police in police stations. We'll link that with the number of police and community support officers, PCSOs, which is where it's likely that so much of the burden of those reductions will have to fall. So, as I said, each of those stages we'll stop and have questions as we go through. And the first thing that we're going to talk about then is about the financial context. We won't linger on it, but I'm very happy to take questions. We'll take the financial context and the policing context, then questions. So the key facts, really, and some of them were in the film already. Since 2010-11, we've had to make savings of just over £40 million. That doesn't mean the budget's gone down by that amount, but with all the absorbing the cost pressures, which are inevitable, that over £40 million has had to be saved by Essex Police. And what we've been told to expect by the Home Office and by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, the planning assumption is that for us it works out at more than £60 million up until 2020. That's what we've had to plan for, and those budget reductions start next year. And That's the challenge that we've had to get our head round. In Essex Police, 83% of the budget, 83% of all of our money goes straight on the salaries of our police officers and staff. And you've already heard from that film that some of the other money on things like buildings, in effect, at the moment, is going straight down the drain because our buildings are in such shocking state and there are too many of them. We have to address that. On the other hand, the technology we need, we've probably underinvested in, so some real challenges. To give you the context, what does £1 million look like? Well, £1 million pays for about 20 members of staff. We've expressed it here as police constables, but that's roughly what you get for £1 million. It's about 20 police officers or members of staff. Currently, we're just under 3,000 officers, and that's 600 fewer than we had back in 2010-11. That's how much the force has had to absorb over those years. And so, given that we're probably halfway through the period of austerity, if we accept what government says, during that entire period we'll have cut Essex policing budgets by a third. That's the impact of that 10 years of austerity. And of course, Essex, the policing budget is not alone in this. Most other bits of government are facing just the same sort of cuts, but it's policing that we're focusing on tonight. Let's say a little bit about where that money comes from, because I think it's very relevant. About 2/3 of our funding for policing comes from a central government grant. It's called the Home Office grant, and the other third comes from your council tax. So 2/3 from central government grant, a third from council tax. I've, as you know, probably know, each year for the last 3 years, I've put the council tax up as much as I've been allowed by government rules. In 1 year, they bent the rules and let me put it up a little bit more, but it was absolutely at the margins. So I have done that. In fact, most police and crime commissioners did the same. The difficult problem we've got with our council tax is that we pay the second least in the country. Sussex pays a few pence less than us in council tax. We pay about if you live in a Band D property, about £147 a year. If you lived in Surrey, you pay 212. They're pretty much at the top. I think it may be a little bit more than that, just over some 210, 212, 215. That gap between £147 that we pay and 212 that they pay in Surrey is the equivalent to about 700 police officers. That's that, and the average is £180, which is about 320 more police officers. If you think in that currency. The old police authority, the former police authority that I took over from, they had set the limits. They set those council tax, and it's rightly so. We're all proud to, I want to live in a low tax country. There's nothing wrong with low tax, but ultimately we get what we pay for. And my argument at the moment is with asking the Home Office to work very hard with the Treasury to get that lifted so that I could put council tax up more. I've said publicly I'd like to put it up perhaps 50 pence a week, 50p a week, which would buy us an extra 300 police officers. But there's no guarantee we'll get that. I've tried that argument for the last 2 or 3 years. We haven't won it, but I know the Home Secretary is batting for us, and I'm hoping that they might hear. The other 2/3 that comes from government, and I'll stop on finance in just a moment. The other 2/3 that comes from government, you may have seen the debate that's been going on over the last 2 weeks. It's driven by a thing called the funding formula. The Treasury gives a big lot of money to the Home Office for policing. The Home Office divvies that money out to police forces. Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, they all get their share. It's driven by a funding formula. We've all known for a long time the funding formula is well out of date. It's probably 15 years out of date and doesn't reflect current demand. The Home Office worked through the whole summer trying to get a new formula. They consulted on it quite widely. We all entered that debate. They then sent out the figures, and clearly there were winners and losers. You're divvying up a cake a different way. Some are going to get a bigger slice, some are going to get a smaller slice. We were getting one of the biggest extra slices. It was very good news for us. It was probably about 14 or 15 million pounds a year extra we would have got through the funding formula. But the Home Office officials had made a mistake with the data. They used some 2001 data rather than 2011 data. You'll have seen the fuss in the press, and the Home Office decided they're going to wait for a year before doing that exercise again. So a bit of relief. I thought the money we might have to save was not quite as much as predicted. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So we won't know until the end of November how much we will be getting for next year. or the Home Office won't know, and they've told us they're going to tell us on December the 18th what our funding for next year is, so we're going to have a great Christmas planning next year's budget, because it has to be set by the end of January. There's a lot of detail in that, but it's really quite important. Headlines, 2/3 from government. We know that's going to go down. We don't know how much. We won't know till December. 1/3 from the council tax. I'm having a continuing dialogue with government allowing me to put it up. Most MPs in Essex support me, 1 or 2 don't. It'll all be played out in January, exactly how much we'll have for next year. But we know the cuts are going to be at least £15 million. We can be sure of that, and that's what we're having to budget on for next year. I've said enough. Chief Constable, why don't you say a little bit about the policing context, and then we'll have a first round of questions.
Thanks, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Kavanagh. I've now been Chief Constable for 2.5 years, and just to put some context around that, having served for 28 years in the Met, I was surprised at how thin my officers are spread across the county when I arrived in force. And of course, as we've explained, significant reductions have taken place already, and that does put an enormous pressure on them. Both PCSOs, police staff and officers continue to deliver quite remarkably in spite of the level of demand on them. You've got there what is an average day for Essex Police. There is no such thing as an average day. In the last 2 weeks, I've had my officers shot at. Somebody's been charged with an offence in relation to that this evening. We had a number of stabbings that took place yesterday. We had 9 high-risk missing people yesterday evening, in which my officers were trying to track down individuals with dementia and mental health issues. There are over 700 mental health incidents every single month. People in crisis not knowing which way to turn, sometimes presenting a risk to themselves and less often presenting a risk to others, but desperately in need of some type of support. We're trying to, in terms of the demand that you see up there, work differently and think differently. We have mental health professionals in a triage car with us so that we don't have to put people who can get the right medication and support their families into mental health units. We're trying to think differently, so I'm not tying up my officers sitting down in a mental health unit for many, many hours. 59 people a month are deemed under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. It's very demanding on the health service, and it's demanding on the officers, and it's horrible for those who are subject to those type of interventions. You are far more likely to get killed or injured on our roads than you are walking down our streets. And we have some of the best roads teams in the country, and we'll talk later on about the scale of what they're trying to do. Some of you rightly question, and I get involved probably at least a couple of times a week. For those of you who read the Daily Mail, blue lights are on our cars because we use them. I've intervened in accidents, I've intervened in people using mobile phones, and I've stopped to help people who are in distress. We get in the region of 6,000 calls a day, 1,200 of those incidents, 600 of them emergency incidents. We have done the demand profiling which says we can respond to about 600 of those. So we have to start making some decisions about what we go to and what we don't. And certainly seeing some of the questions tonight, I need to be honest with you. I will not patronise you and I will not play around numbers. My office arrests about 100 people a day and we record in the region of 272 crimes. What I've been trying to do since I've been Chief Constable is making sure that my officers and staff understand what productivity means. Where are they? What are they doing? How visible are they to me? And how can we prove that they're actually doing their very best to keep you safe? We've returned the command that comes under Luke and Leslie over here back to geographical responsibility. So the response teams that come out to those calls are now locally based. Leslie's in charge of those teams. She's got greater control of them, together with Chief Superintendent Collison. We've changed the way that the officers work. Some of you who work with police officers will know we've changed the shift pattern, so we're there at the times you need us the most. We're working more effectively with Kent to try and keep back office costs down, and now we're working across the region to look at other ways of finding savings. We'll work through this with you, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes to try and make sure we are as efficient as possible. In addition to that, what we also face is that crime is changing significantly. For those of you with young children, they are now more at risk at your kitchen table or in their bedroom on the internet than they are walking down to the local shops. I had a conversation very recently with a very senior member of an organisation. I won't go any further than that. They were sitting down at their kitchen table on a Saturday morning and their 11-year-old daughter, Chloe, was sending a picture of herself, a normal picture of herself, and her father turned around to her and said, you know, who are you sending the picture to? He thought it was a new friend at senior school. It was a 42-year-old man from the West Midlands. The pressure and the harm around fraud, around harassment, domestic abuse has changed in the way that people target those that are responsible. What has also changed is that the number of reports of child abuse going on in the county has gone up by 120% in the last 3 years, 12 months. 3.8 million adult victims and 2.5 million cyber-enabled crimes. The world is changing, and what I've got to make sure is that Essex Police begins to adapt and predict the harms that are going to take place to you, the people who are trying to hack into your social media, your bank accounts and everything else are being dealt with as effectively as we have done with burglaries. Crime is not the conventional crimes that we record. There is some really good news. For the last 2 years, we've recorded, for the first time since it's been recorded, less than 100,000 crimes. That's an enormous achievement, but it only tells part of the picture. A, we've already discussed it's not just about crime, but B, there are now new and emerging crimes going on behind closed doors that we need to understand and that we need to deal with. What we're hoping to do is to better use technology, and both the PCC and I will talk to you briefly about the investments that we are having to make in trying to give officers more technology to identify how they can keep victims up to date, how they can record crimes properly, and how they can actually allow you as members of the community to access the information you need when you need to do so. Unfortunately, in a time of austerity due to underinvestment in things like technology, we're not only having to find the savings and the reductions, we're also having to invest in infrastructure, IT, that is dated and not supporting operational officers, PCSOs and police staff to do their job. Really complex, changing environment in which we can't just keep doing the same things in the same way. It's incumbent upon me as a Chief Constable to think not just about my time now, but it's also to invest in the future to make sure Essex Police is dealing with those problems and changing crime types for the future.
3 quick questions, if I may, Chief Constable. Those figures you gave for cybercrime and fraud, presumably they're national figures, were they? The 3.8 million.
Office, yeah, not just Essex, thankfully. No. Office of National Statistics.
So 2 quick questions about Essex. That very great increase in reported child abuse, and I think I've seen the figure that there's a child rape reported every day in Essex.
Yes.
Rape of a child reported every day, which of course, has to be investigated. That big increase, do you think there's more offences, or people now got more confidence in reporting? Have you got a feel for that?
What we are experiencing is a lot of historical crimes. Thankfully, I think the Jimmy Savile effect means that people will look back into their childhoods and they will not tolerate things that happened to them many years ago. The way that we investigate domestic abuse, sometimes the abuse is not just physical, it's sexual. Women, and it is overwhelmingly women who are subject to those type of incidents, are often raped, and when we investigate those, they will tell us that there's an interesting complexity. You deal with a domestic abuse case, you speak to a woman who's distressed, and you ask her a specific question, and she will say, yes, he has raped me. Now, the bizarre thing for the victim is she just wants to give us that information so we understand the risk to her. Because of Home Office accounting rules, we then have to officially record it as a crime and then have to investigate it. Now, sometimes those individuals want us to know. They don't want us to suddenly ask them to go for physical examinations and everything else. What's concerning me around the child abuse piece is I think we have a generation of young people, we see it around this concept of sexting, where they send intimate images to each other. We see the accessibility of pornography, extreme pornography, really nasty images that we see in the media today, with people having easy access to it. And I'm fearful that we've got a sexualised generation who don't understand where some of the boundaries are. You know, sleepovers where you have 13, 14-year-old children and access to alcohol are dangerous. We should be protecting our children. So to answer your question, Commissioner, I think there is an increase in reported in historical crimes because there is a greater confidence that we care and we're going to do better. But I do have a concern that there are also increasing numbers of people getting sexually aggressive at a younger age as well. And the other phenomenon that is being recorded now is older generations, sometimes single people, are going on to dating websites without the right advice and right support. Particularly older women are then being subject to sexual attack when they go out for an innocent dinner or date, and then suddenly they feel embarrassed, they don't want to come forward, and it's a really difficult crime type. We need to support people to come forward.
Thank you.
So let's move on to questions. Is Peter Boynes here tonight?
Yes, I am.
Peter, you had a question?
Well, I have, Nick, but I'm afraid I think you may have
Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much, Nick, but I think possibly your introductory remarks have answered it. I was interested in the email question that I sent you in exploring just how much freedom you have as our Commissioner to put it bluntly, to get our council tax precept put up as far as possible, because certainly as a local resident and all the local residents I know, we'd gladly pay more.
Yeah. Peter, thank you for that. Perhaps I take the opportunity to explain one of the criticisms that's been made of me directly is that, why aren't I rushing towards a referendum? Because in theory I could have a referendum. The trouble is the way that works is immensely complicated. My chief executive has studied it actually with the chief executives of all of the police and crime commissioners. And the way the legislation is set up means that the question has to be asked in a very precise way, which is, would you support, I think the question would read, would you support, say it's 50p a week, a 17.5% increase in your council tax for policing? But I'm not allowed to make the case. I'm not allowed to explain under the rules. All the advice I've had is it would fail. It was tried in Bedfordshire. Ollie Martins, the PCC there, he had 3 polls of local residents. Every poll said, yes, we'd back it. And almost every meeting I go to, people say they'll back it. When he went through the process, to his fury, discovering all of these rules, it was voted down 70-30. And the advice I've had is that it's likely to fail. It would cost £2 million to run. And it doesn't feel to me right at this stage. I'd rather keep the pressure on government and hope that we can get the cap lifted for those of us at the bottom of the funding scale. And I am, I'm not overly optimistic, but I'm still quite hopeful.
Instead of asking the question, I think it would be better if I just wished you all the luck.
All right, thanks very much indeed. Is Roger Passfield here? Roger? No. Lizzie, would you like to deal with his question?
Yes, Roger's the chair of the Thurrock Neighbourhood Watch. 2 questions. It doesn't say if it's directed to the Commissioner or the Chief, perhaps both. But why we're not shouting more about the cuts? Roger believes there are more people out there breaking the law than ever before. He gives some examples around antisocial behaviour and road traffic offences.
I know the Home Secretary well. I see her quite regularly. I've written to her, and I know her officials very well. I've written 2 or 3 letters during the course of the year, laying out in absolute detail the financial situation that Essex Police is in. And it's not just about the absolute sums of money in our budget. Some forces are sitting on large reserves, and they haven't yet done any of the rationalisation of their support services. Now, before the period of austerity started in 2009, Essex Police with Kent joined together, and we have fully integrated support services. So the IT, the finance, the procurement, all of those, the support services are done jointly with Kent. So Essex and Kent together are a very large policing outfit. They've already taken a huge amount of savings out of those support services, so they've done that bit. The former police authority spent the reserves. There are no reserves other than ones, well, there are some, but I think we have the smallest reserves in the country. So we have the lowest precept, we've done the back-end rationalisation, we've got no reserves, and the force is very efficient. That's measured by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, and wherever we look against all the measures, Essex Police is about the most efficient, which has to be the case because we spend less on our police than any other police force. So they've had to become efficient, and they're still a good force. Do I achieve more by shouting at the Home Secretary or continuing to make the case, with her privately, on paper, arguing it? I said a year ago publicly that I thought the situation would now be perilous, and the situation now is perilous. There are press here tonight, they will report that. I'm saying it publicly, I've said it to the Home Secretary, I've said it to her officials. My getting in her face every day, if you want to use the colloquial, is not going to be effective. It's much better for me to make the case coherently, explain the facts, the Chief Constable will speak for himself, but I think he's taken an extremely principled position, and what he has said is that he will deliver the most professional policing he can with the money that I give him, which I think is the right thing to say. But I do know also that the Chief Constable is very much respected in the Home Office, and I'm sure is also listened to. Stephen, I don't know your view on making a noise, but also the point about, is crime really getting worse? it's changing. I have a slight doubt about whether it's really getting worse.
Couple of bits and pieces. I will talk honestly. I will not patronise you, and I will not lie about anything. And I've had lengthy interviews on the BBC. I will talk honestly to you tonight about the scale of the consequences of where we find ourselves with the budgets in policing. That's my job. When I meet with MPs, I will talk privately with them. I will not become an apologist for cuts within policing, and neither will I lobby. It's absolutely vital when we go through these difficult times that you remember and I remember that the great office of Chief Constable, and I'm not a great person, but I hold a great office, is that it is apolitical, and that I must never get involved in the politics that goes on. I will talk about the consequences, and I will talk about the scale of what we're having to face. It is not my choice to find the cuts that I have been asked to do so because of government's requests and the austerity measures. What I am trying to do, and it is a truly thankless task, is to try and take the savings, a third out over 10 years, from the places that will cause the least impact. Now that's really difficult when you respect and love the PCSOs in the way that I think we all do. I've commended PCSOs in the last few weeks for running at people with knives. An arrest recently in relation to the Loughton incident, the person who chased that individual, we believe to have been involved in that, was a PCSO. They do some brilliant work, and people act as though I don't like PCSOs because of the cuts I've been talking about. What I'm having to do is invest in child abuse, into rape, and making sure that when you are burgled or robbed, that you are going to be made as safe as possible. So there are some really difficult implications there, and that is what I'm trying to do with integrity and authenticity. Yes, but you're absolutely right, Commissioner. If we just whinge and don't try and show how we are trying to become more efficient, it becomes an opportunity for people to claim we're crying wolf and we don't understand what we're trying to do and we're not taking responsibility. I think I see across the board, from the newest PC through to me, an organisation trying to take responsibility and deliver in a set of circumstances I don't think have been replicated outside of wartime. This is a truly challenging time for policing.
So in a moment we're going to move on to talk about buildings, we're going to talk about local policing, we're going to talk about public contact. But sticking with funding and with changing crime, it's a chance for you to ask questions. So waiting for the microphone. Councillor Terry.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Councillor Terry from Southend Borough Council, obviously South East Essex Councillor, and one of my portfolios is public safety. I'm going to try not to be rude. I believe anyone that thinks that George Osborne is going to give more money is, frankly, it's bonkers. I don't believe that's going to happen. And I don't agree with you on the cost of holding a precept referendum, because that can be done in combination with another local election, which would reduce the cost down considerably. You've dismissed and constantly denied the people of Essex the right to have a referendum on the precept from the very start of your tenure. You've had 4 years to do this. Why have you prevented the people of Essex from deciding for themselves what level of policing they want, and thus retaining our community police through a democratic vote? Because I believe there's a real answer. You know, you're talking about not whinging, but I think there's a leadership issue here. I'm being respectful. I believe the argument can be won. I've been a community activist for 20 years as an independent, and I know it can be won.
Okay, well, thank you. Clearly, there was no way that a referendum would even be thought about in the first year, because none of the PCCs would have come to grips with the funding. The second year, we had the cap lifted, and we were able to lift it a little bit more. But then those first 2 years, I was under intense pressure from the Police and Crime Panel, actually, who didn't want to approve an increase in precept at all. I had to argue pretty hard to the Police and Crime Panel who have to approve my precept increase. And we got their support, but there was pretty strong opposition to any increase in precept. Apart from anything else, for me, in those first 2 years, to be fully at grips with the police funding, to fully understand the scale of the challenge. I then looked very hard at the precept last year, and that's when we started doing all the detailed work on whether we should try it. All the advice from day one was that it will be voted down and it can't be done and it would be expensive. And we've continued exploring that. And of course, one PCC was bold enough to try it, and it was voted down 70-30 in Bedfordshire, which is a county which is facing even more severe problems than we are by a long margin. So I go with professional advice, I'm afraid, Councillor Terry, and the professional advice was that it would be unsuccessful at the costs. The trouble is that we can only do it with the election after that we've issued. So we have to issue the council tax bill. So say I want to put it up 15% next year, I'd issue all the council tax through all the 12 district councils who the council tax bills go out. We have a precept, if it's voted down, the whole council tax has to be reissued, recalculated, so all of the council tax bills have to go out again, and the total cost is they're not sure exactly how much it will be, but it's close to £2 million. And I don't think it's right to risk £2 million of your money when the advice is that we shouldn't do it. I'm not saying that day may never come, because the situation, it's bad now, it could get worse. But we thought about it very carefully and taken that decision. It's absolutely, I'm certainly not afraid of taking decisions. We're taking some very difficult decisions now, and some exciting ones too, because we're going to talk about some exciting stuff this evening. So that's the answer to that. Sir.
Yes, I'm Councillor Keith Gibbs. I'm Essex County Council. I want to know how the finance is going to come across where it's been proved that young people are grooming younger people and then handing them over to older people where the sexual offences are being caused. The grooming is going on, and I know as a result from my own son who works on a Sapphire unit, his cases are getting more and more every day. And I think that we should be doing, or you should be looking at helping out and putting your finances to some of these problems with officers and that, to go to schools and things like this, to reduce the possibility of some of these kids becoming groomed for sexual offences. And the other thing is, it would also include, you would be able to reduce some of the more serious sexual offences and crimes and things like that.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a very good question. I think I'll pass it straight to the Chief Constable. My own view, and the Chief and I discussed this a lot during the summer, how he was going to use his resources. I think that youth work that Essex Police do is absolutely crucial. There's some really good news stories. Youth offending continues to go down in the county, and young people are, I think, demonstrably better behaved probably than they've ever been. But as the Chief already talked about some of these changing crime types, particularly with access to the internet, I think that those programmes of work in the schools are crucial. And I think we've secured agreement that work will continue, and it needs to focus on those harms. You're quite right.
I think, as the other thing that we need to do is, one of the key public bodies that goes into schools is the fire service. And what we have the ludicrous position at the moment is you'd have the fire service going in and talking about fire alarms and sometimes stranger danger. Well, stranger danger we all grew up with, and I'm looking at the audience, I think most of us are of a similar age. We say no to strangers and don't get into people's cars. Well, now it's don't get into their social media sites, don't start engaging in them, don't start giving them photographs of yourself. And the fire service access to school, we've got to use this more effectively, because I just explained, I think in the region, and I've got the Chief Superintendent who's my Director of Change and is doing a fantastic job at it. In the region of £5 million during austerity, I'm investing in better investigations and support for child abuse. We're going to have some really difficult times because it's just not good enough in this county at the moment. And I will be standing up and I'm putting the resources in with the support of the Police and Crime Commissioner. But you're absolutely right. I don't want to investigate it after a child has had an image of itself being abused put across the internet. I don't want to arrest a naive kid who's suddenly shown a picture of her top half to somebody she thought might be her boyfriend, being arrested in the way that we've seen in the media, because it's an offence to transmit an image of a child in an indecent image. We've got to get above that. We've got to get ahead of it. We've got to help the children to make the right decisions about drugs, around their own identity, and around not sexualising their behaviour on the internet and in other ways. So you're absolutely right. But I need to be effectively doing that with the fire service and other visitors to schools, with teachers and others, because police don't do it and can't do it on their own.
We do need to join up that voluntary effort. You know, there are so many agencies looking towards doing this work in schools, and if there's an absolute imperative that at the community level, and I think it is best done at community level, all of those, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on when we talk about the community policing hubs, that we have the right people in the same space saying, how are we going to address this problem? With it, at some cost to the police, I continue to take some money out of Essex Police budget, I think about £350,000 this year, to spend on what we call the Community Safety Development Fund. I've maintained funding to your local councils to make sure they've got money, and then I've put additional money into projects that do this work of all different sorts. And that money, I think it's really important that we encourage communities to take ownership of some of these problems. My final word, the Chief talked about growing up, and I found this profoundly disturbing. We don't talk to strangers. For those of you not aware of it, there's a social media site called Omegle. I learned about it, talking with social workers and teachers. Omegle, the strapline is talk to strangers. And who are they targeting? Young kids, and for the obvious purposes. This is shocking stuff going on, and people just don't know enough about these things. We must deal with them. There's two questions in the middle. Should we take Joe's first?
Thank you. First of all, Joe McPherson, Rush District Councillor, but I also volunteer with a community group in a deprived area of Rochford. So can I firstly commend both the police and the fire service, because things like the New Initiative Fund has made a lot of difference to young people. Could I also put a question perhaps to Councillor Gibbs, and perhaps he could lobby Essex County Council to cease reducing the funding on the youth service, and they too would have more time to complement the services. Thank you.
There was another question just in front of you. I'm getting horribly behind time, so we're going to have to... Short questions, please.
Okay, it's Robert Bailey from South Pemfleet, just an ordinary member of the public, nobody important. Without adequate border controls and no idea of how many immigrants will be coming into the UK in the future, we're inevitably importing crime. So how can the police cuts be justified or even considered when we face hundreds of thousands of unchecked immigrants freely entering the community where we'll have inadequate resources to deal with them?
I'll let the Chief talk a little bit about his experience of foreign criminals. My dad was a cop in Essex, and he was the Chief Superintendent in Romford when Romford was still part of Essex. And I can tell you we grew some pretty good criminals of our own. East London and some of the areas, we've had lots of homegrown criminals and still will do. I think you're probably right that we'll have changing communities with changing crime types. Chief, I don't know if you've got anything to say about what changing patterns we're seeing with migration, with East Europeans in particular. I know people worry about, but is there a particular issue in Essex?
I think there's a range of things going on. I mean, in one weekend, I think you're right, Commissioner. We've got to be really careful. Some of the people that we're seeing being trafficked by these villains are victims. We saw that image of that child on the beach. Some of these people are being thrown out of their homes and countries if they try and stay put. As a result of ISIL, they either be raped or murdered. They are desperate, some of these people, and some of them aren't criminals. But also, we've seen one weekend 2 separate lorry loads of people bomb bursting from the back, and suddenly you have my officers trying to get some of these people together. Some of them are vulnerable, some of them are terrified, but then they're tied up, and they're tying up the areas within the police stations as we try and get the immigration service in, and it does have an impact on their ability then to go and answer to deal with crimes and other matters. What we've tried to do in the county is look at our own borders. We've got Stansted, we've got a number of seaports, and we've launched an operation called Radar with the Home Office and others that have looked at people who are arrested by us for offences, and we do an extra level of checks in the county to make sure that if they have offended overseas or they're wanted overseas, that we understand that and that we can use our immigration laws to have them deported and removed from the country. So we don't put them through our own criminal justice system and take time. And there's been some very strong stories about using that information that's available through this Operation Radar, where we've had people removed who have committed horrible offences abroad and they've been returned to their jurisdiction. So we're going to do more. I think your point around the sheer volume and the nature of the demand, being a coastal county and a county with 2 major airports, someone will no doubt tell me there's 3. At Stansted and Southend, significant traffic growing year on year. We do need to reflect that. And if I'm honest with you, what Essex Police has not done well historically We look at the new Dubai Ports World. The police put no funding bid in when that was being developed. You know, when we are seeing these increasing communities, when we're seeing the changing nature of communities, we have got to be better at making sure through county councils and others that we put the funding bids in to make sure that policing can deal with those new challenges. And the other biggest issue we're facing at the moment is London councils are turfing out lots of their problem families into the coastal regions. And we are seeing those families being moved lock, stock and barrel without the support, without the money, and local district councils, county council and police are then having to pick up those problems. Clacton Southend are particular examples, but it's happening across the board. So a lot of the issues are also within the South East and the way people with the new benefits are just shifting out to lower cost rentals.
We are getting slightly behind. I'd like just to acknowledge we've had questions in from Janet Middleton, from Gordon Evans, Mr Rouse from Halstead. There's one from Mr Reid you want to pick up that takes us a slightly different direction.
Yes, Martin Reid, who writes on behalf of the residents of Little Clacton and Tendring generally, he sent it along to me with about 9 questions. Many of the points have been covered, but there's one element that is worth exploring. He's picked up the story that in some parts of Essex, private security patrols are being paid for by residents, and Mr Reid is concerned of the potential for that to develop into some kind of vigilante response, and he'd really like to know how that would be managed, how that situation would be managed by Essex Police.
Thank you, Lindsay. I think he was one of a number of people who said, was I going to resign as well? And no, I'm not. My job is supremely difficult. I wish I'd been a Chief Constable at a time of growth. It would have been a lot more fun. But of course, as a Chief Constable, many of the challenges we're getting pushed are towards my office, and that's right. I've got to be honest with you, members of the public. We look at the amount of money that's been spent, £2 a week, I think it is, that this private security company are offering in Frinton, for people who are not trained, who do not have the skills that my officers do not have the connections with communities, but are delivering on a commercial basis. They're business people, that's up to them. I would rather that we have a properly resourced, properly directed police service that connects to local communities and understands those local issues. I am against the private provision of security. I think it leads to haves and have-nots. And so often in our communities, the people who are most worried are the safest. Actually, the idea of then the people who are in the most deprived communities suffering the greatest level of antisocial behaviour, the greatest level of crime, not being able to afford that uplift, doesn't feel right to me. And I've got to be absolutely clear, if any private security company or other individuals move from supporting, understanding, being visible into vigilantism, they will be dealt with robustly by my officers. I will have no place for vigilantes in this county.
Thank you. There is going to be more time for questions at the end. I think we should move on to the estates, if we can, to talk about our buildings. So our approach, and this is one of the more exciting bits, regardless of money, the Chief Constable and I would undoubtedly be going through a major programme at this stage to make the Essex Police estate fit for purpose. We've inherited a very, very old estate. There are buildings that are jolly nearly 200 years old, some of them. We've got 80 buildings. We probably need 30, and they cost. There's about £30 million backlog of money that we should spend to get that estate up to a decent condition, and we're throwing straight down the drain about £2 million, which is just to keep, in effect, keep the lights on in buildings that we have to use, but in a really poor state of repair. The headquarters site itself in Chelmsford sprawls over 20 acres. It's prime residential land. It's 20 acres. It's buildings of all different sorts. The one built in 1903, a quite pretty building, a house. It was the Chief Constable's house, right through to some very ugly buildings from the 70s and the 80s. We simply have to try and rationalise those buildings. They were built for policing in a different time. Some of those buildings built before cars, before radios, before telephones. And so over the last 18 months, a bit more than that now, we've been looking at, in an excited way actually, to say what are the buildings that we should have to make sure Essex Police can police the county well in the most efficient way. We shouldn't be spending money on buildings. We want it on frontline police officers. Recognising also that locked up in that, in 25 of those buildings are buildings that are actually used where members of the public can go. So that was a challenge for us, and the Chief Constable will say a little bit more for that. So we've been looking at that entire estate. We've been using professional firm Michelle's have been working with us saying, what do we need? What should we have? What can we do with the headquarters? We've already launched some of that work. We've launched it with Southend because it's clear that there are going to be a number of police bases that are going to stay important police bases regardless. And those that we have to invest in, we're spending, I think, nearly £10 million, £9 million rings a bell on Southend police station to make that absolutely fit for the next 20 to 50 years. We must do those for the buildings that we need. We must get rid of the ones that we don't. And we've been really excitedly doing that work. Of course, it's come at a time when we've got no money to do it, so that presents us with a real challenge, but that's our problem, I was going to say not yours. I don't think it is. It is our problem to find out how we cope with that. But I wonder if I could hand over to the Chief Constable to say a little bit more about how he sees the policing need for buildings, how you've gone about deciding where they should be, and the next steps in the programme, really.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just a couple of examples. I was quite shocked when I became Chief Constable as I went round the estate. First day I was here, I went round and visited every district. Southend police station at that stage had critical windows where the glass was falling out. You could put your finger through the frame where they were meant to be bolted in. The first meeting I went to at Brentwood, there was paint peeling off the wall. Saffron Walden, sodden with damp. These are not buildings that people should be placed into to try and work. We knew that we couldn't afford to try and get all of these right, and as the PCC has highlighted, Victorian age buildings for a Victorian policing model. So what we have done is we have done some extensive demand profiling across the county, looking at millions of lines of data, where the crime is taking place, when it is taking place. In addition to that, we've looked in detail at which police stations have been visited, which front counters, at what stage, at what time, to do what. One of those months was February, so we got the winter footfall, and then one of the other ones was July, so we got that summer understanding, particularly on the coastal areas, so we understood the difference. And what we saw was that currently you have up there is the current state of where all of the police stations are and front counters. The blue dots, to try and make it easier for you, are stations open from 12 noon to 6 p.m. Monday to Saturday. And the red dots, the red stations, are open 8 o'clock in the morning to midnight, 7 days a week. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a model that I can afford. I'm trying to invest in our officers getting new technology, body-worn cameras, better computers to investigate in the modern age. That is not something that we can sustain. What we were seeing was that there were some front counters that would not be reporting crimes for weeks on end. They would have people coming in for convenience. There were occasions where people would ask for advice. But it was not an efficient model to heat and occupy those buildings in the modern age. We needed to put that money somewhere else. We compared ourselves to other counties, Kent and Hertfordshire in terms of similarity, and they still have less than we are proposing here. So what you will see is the new model there is that each of the districts will continue to have a front counter presence. What we know is that 75% of all calls take place Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I'm absolutely clear, whether it's my response officers or the front counters, they should be available when the public wants them, not when it's convenient for us to deliver. You will see that 2 of those stations, Saffron Walden and Malden, the 2 blue ones there, are limited to Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. The rest of them are open 7 days a week. One of the questions, it does mean that there will be, in the region of, everyone will have, I think it's 95% of the population will be within 10 miles of one of those stations. It's because what we are seeing is that there are increasing numbers of calls. There are increasing access to our webpage. And we've got our head of comms here. I think it's in the region of 250,000 people. How many people access our social media site a week? 1 million people. So people are trying to access our services differently. Now, this doesn't mean we're pulling away. It means that we have to try and provide these services in a different way. The research that we carried out over those months showed that in the 2-month period, 1,700 people visited Rayleigh Police Station, where nearly 4,000 visited Basildon and 6,600 visited Southend. So some of this is about suddenly saying, where do we put our resources where they're going to get the most effect? Throughout those 2 months, only 19 visitors reported a crime at Rayleigh Police Station. So it suddenly means, in terms of occupying that counter, we've had to choose to do things differently. What people haven't fully understood, and maybe it's my fault for failing to articulate it, those front counters are not the locations that police officers dispatch themselves from. So actually, instead of having officers or staff behind those counters taking up time and money, the officers and staff need to be increasingly out there on patrol, ready to respond to what's going on. So when you actually add on for the next slide the 4 different locations where there are additional response operational bases as well, you have the 4 in the south of the county, and over on the right you've got Harwich. So what we've tried to do is look at the demands, look at the number of people visiting our station, look at the money we have available, look at the investment that we're trying to put into technology and modernising what we're doing, and said this, at the moment, is the cheapest, is probably not the cheapest. If we went to an equivalent of Hertfordshire or Kent, there would be less. What you and I are trying to do is commit to those local policing arrangements that will allow our officers to still try and be as close to communities and hubs as possible.
Just thanks, Chief Constable. Just, I think, one correction to what you said. I think in the Brentwood and in the Epping districts there aren't going to be front counters, because I was in Epping the other day and they told me so. So there is one area which is not going to have an open front counter. I'm interested, and we've talked about it before, but there are 2 questions really. How confident you are you've got the right location for the open front counters? And what about somewhere like Rayleigh or Canby or Brentwood? And I was in Brentwood last week. An interesting example, actually. We're just about getting ready to sign an MOU with Brentwood Council to move the policing operation in with the district council out of their council offices. So the police station will move in there, and of course they will have a front counter that's for council purposes. And the leader of the council is saying, we're quite happy to do signposting. If somebody wants to come and make an appointment with you, they can be done through our front office. And of course the advantage of having them in the same space is you then start to get into the ability to get your community policing hubs working with other people locally. It's a very exciting concept. But how confident are you that the front counter is in the right place? And do you think there is scope somewhere like Rayleigh? If somebody in Rayleigh wants to see the police office, do they have to go to Southend? Or is there going to be some opportunity to make appointments to meet somewhere in Rayleigh, the town hall, the library?
I think what we have to recognise is if we are going to find the reduction in costs that we need to through the front counters, alternatives have got to be offered. What you can't just do is shut down a police station and expect people to accept it. What we're going to be looking to do, and I think one of the later slides, I might invite the local district commander to talk about her vision about what that would mean locally. But if we close somewhere down, we must offer an alternative, and whether that's a regular meeting in the local library, the local town hall, it doesn't matter where. There are supermarkets, there are a variety of people who are offering us opportunities to make sure that we can still have those contacts. The building societies now talk about clicks and bricks, because there are different ways that people want to access information. So we will still have that presence. Every single blue light that goes from a police station will then be relocated. So for example, if we're using Brentwood as an example, suddenly that blue light, I would ask the town hall, and we've spoken to the county council, they're supportive, we'll have that symbol of police still being in local communities. But what my hope is yes, we'll do local meeting places, yes, we'll still have local problem solving, but actually in some of these local hubs, and we'll hear about it shortly, is actually public safety at the heart of it. So we'll have problem-solving teams that understand antisocial behaviour, that understand crime prevention, that understand licensing, that understand youth disorder, and suddenly, not just police, but district councils, county council opportunities, charities, in the same location where people in trouble can go to and get much better services. Is it ideal? No, but we're going to make sure we don't pull away from this totally.
There's opportunity there too, isn't there?
Absolutely.
There must be opportunity. Before we take questions on the buildings, so I'd like to open this up for more discussion from the floor. You talked about the alternatives being able to access through the website or the telephone service. I hear continually that the 101 is still not a great service. We say 80% of people think it's great. The trouble is with a million calls a year, that's hundreds of thousands of people who don't find it great. In terms of improving the access of the internet, the website, the phones, that has to be part of this change program, doesn't it?
It does. The interesting thing is when you've supported us investing into a new website, and we're hoping by spring of next year people will be able to report certain crime types onto that. Some people want to report a crime and they don't want an officer to attend. They don't want all a blue light and a Battenberg car sitting on their front drive. What they want to be able to do is get a crime reference number, and they want to report something with a minimum of fuss. So that we believe that with a new website that will allow victims to be updated automatically when there's a change in what's taking place on their crime. Colloquially, some forces call it Track My Crime. We think the reporting changing. We think the ability for a new communication system where instead of getting put into a switchboard where you get lost in canned music, you suddenly are able to contact the officer direct and leave a message with them. There are different ways that we can actually open up some of these opportunities. And the website at the moment is, I think, an IT specialist from about 1983 would be proud of it. It needs to be improved. It needs to be invested in. And we've got some people with some imagination who want to do that. And you're giving us the opportunity, because of some of the savings, to invest in better web opportunities. But it will still be about some form of local presence. And we've got Kevin here with us today. Sorry, Tony. Why Kevin? Tony, I apologise. The other thing that we're seeing is the specials actually know the communities as well as anyone. They give up their time to come in and connect with us and help us to understand exactly what is going on locally, and where the specials fit in, where those local partnerships fit in, where charities fit in, and where we then fit in is going to become increasingly important.
We can come back to that, can't we? We can come back to that as we talk about the local policing piece. So let's open this up, because this change programme with buildings is a big deal. It's exciting, actually. Most of it's very exciting. But there's some questions from the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mike Assenheim, Councillor, Southend-on-Sea. You're talking about closing the police stations. Do you really think, to your heart, that having one police station in a borough such as Southend-on-Sea, which serve 180,000 people, one police station is enough? If I can give an example, 3 Fridays ago, I was contacted by an old age pensioner who's not on the internet. She's got a telephone, and she was contacted by a cold caller who, unfortunately, she made an appointment to see. I tried for 4.5 hours to get through, just to speak to somebody in the police force, to ask a question. It wasn't an emergency, it was just an urgent question. I did the 101 number, granted, they answered absolutely spontaneously. But they said, we'll have to put you through to the Crime Bureau. On 5 separate occasions that afternoon, over 4.5 hours, I was kept on hold for 20 minutes. I then tried to my borough commander on his mobile, no answer. I tried his office, no answer. I tried my other personal contacts with policemen in Southend. I could not speak to a policeman. If I can't do it, how can the elderly people or even the residents?
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for helping the ladies. I mean, you probably know, I get the same concern at almost every public meeting I have, that the 101, the contact, making the phones work better, is a real priority. But Chief, it's one for you, really.
It is. That's wholly unacceptable. I just apologise. I'm not going to apologise for the district commander possibly on a day off not answering his or her phone. That's what happens. What we have done is we looked at from when somebody calls in on 101 to report a crime all the way through to the crime getting recorded and an officer coming out to investigate, and we found that people were being put through to too many numbers. I've got an action down here. We need to monitor how quickly those calls are answered in Crime Bureau, and if they're not being answered sufficiently quickly, I need to understand why. That's just not good enough. We're doing our very best to say which crimes need to be put into which departments, not keep people waiting, not putting them into dog legs, putting victims at the heart of it, and you've just given me an example of where we're falling short. I'm the operational lead for this. I noticed you addressed that to the Commissioner. That's my responsibility. We'll do better.
Can I follow up?
If you wait for the mic. Well, let's take another question. Let's follow up on this if we may. Yeah. Back with you. There's another mic. We'll get the other mic over there.
I'm sorry, and I don't want to hog the microphone, but another point I would make, and I'm not here to have a go. 2 weeks ago, I took a photograph of 2 boys on a roof doing graffiti. I did 999 call. They took my details. Never saw any police arrive. When did I get a response from the police? last Saturday morning, 2.5 weeks later.
So I think my question for the Chief is that a prioritisation issue? I mean, do you feel that you've said as you spoke that some things the responses may not happen or may be slow? Is that an example?
It is. I mean, one of the challenges that my officers and staff face is with the number of calls we get, we are able to respond to half of them. And what I'm increasingly trying to do is give them the opportunity and the power to be able to say there is a real threat to somebody there is a real risk to an individual involved. There's an investigative opportunity. 2 people doing graffiti sounds like a pretty good investigative opportunity to me. That the individual is vulnerable in some way, or that it's something that community is particularly feeling strongly about. Because that way, we stop trying to cover everything all the time, which we can't do. Now, that may have been one of the days where we had 2 bomb bursts from people jumping out of lorries and my officers were dragged into the north of the county. It may be one of those days where we've had the tragic stabbing that took place in Chelmsford and you suddenly have cordons and officers aren't available. But just giving you a call back and telling you what's happening and getting that photograph more quickly should still be there. And I find that members of the public, if you say, we're not going to get anyone to you, we're really sorry, we'll get someone with you in the next few hours or few days even, public respect that. When you don't get anyone for that time period, it frustrates. And one of the things I will say is you've got to keep pushing us. The risk I face as Chief Constable is that you then disengage and say there's no point in calling the police. If people call in, we track, we at least record it, and we know what's going on, and then there's a repeat incident, we can come back and we treat it differently. So again, 2 shortfalls that I'm not going to try and justify.
But I think, Chief Constable, that you need to know, I mean, we have talked about it before, that this is a pretty common experience. And perhaps we have to explain it better because it happens a lot. I hear a lot of examples of people who say exactly that same sort of point. And I know how committed you are to making it better, but it does need to be chased down. The other point that seems to strike me about that, in terms of there being able to take a photograph of what happens, and what we must do, what you must do, what we must do between us as we deliver that new capability is for that photograph to be sent straight through to your ops room. So you've got the photographic evidence easily sent through, easily absorbed into the intelligence systems, to make that much easier than it is at the moment, because I know that's problematic too.
And I think, there are a range of initiatives that I've got going on at the moment. One of them is to create a dedicated team so that any photographic image that comes through to us is better dealt with. We're looking at trying to identify what are called super identifiers. I think it's 1 in 100 of us will see a face, we'll be able to connect to it. At the moment, I don't know who my super identifiers are in force, and I don't use them very effectively. We know that we could get much better detections from photographs and CCTV if we manage those images better. And there's an initiative going on at the moment that we're hoping to go live in the spring where they will be used. So you're absolutely right. What do we do when we have those? What do we have when we go to a corner shop? How do we use that image? It's got to be better, and we've got some ideas about how we want to improve it.
Let's take the question there, and then we've got 2 that were sent in on estates. Sir.
Evening, Chief Constable. I'm a retired police officer. With regard to what you're doing with front offices, I understand your reason why, with the shortage of footfall going through the doors. However, I don't believe that 9 to 5 is realistic, as the majority of the people that live around here work up in London. Therefore, should they wish to use the police station on their way home, they'll have no option because it will be closed on their way home. Therefore, the external premises, whatever you use, I feel that a 12 to 8 service would offer a better service to the public.
I had exactly the conversation with the senior officer sitting in front of you. Interestingly, some of the I'll push back to some of the councillors. Some of their licensing departments and antisocial behaviour teams work Monday to Friday 9 to 5. That's not when licensing issues are arising. That's not when antisocial behaviour is happening. So what we need to be able to do, and I had my licensing team working Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and I wasn't happy with that either. So we now have late turn and evening cover with our licensing teams. Challenged the footfall documentation. It's not everyone. You're absolutely right, but it's. Andy, was it 75% of the calls? We will try and maximise the coverage as much as we possibly can, and whether that's working with volunteers, specials and others, once we've got those locations, how we use them is really important, and I take your challenge, sir.
2 questions about estates that were sent in, Lindsay.
Yes, the first one, Alison Routledge. Alison here? No, she asked the question, if police stations are to be closed on a large scale, those are her words, not mine, could a small local counter be provided situated in another public building, such as a library or a council office or even a shop, and she refers to the model that the post office introduced when they closed down some of their buildings.
The answer is absolutely yes. It's those type of ideas. It's that local connection. The districts have been really supportive. County Council's been really supportive. What we need to do is use some imagination now about making sure that people know where we are and that we can signpost it and make it easy for them.
Thank you. The other question, I think you've actually answered, Chief. It's from Martin Rayner, but it's worth flagging that he's formally asked a question. He's the chair of the Mistley Parish Council, and he makes the point that in the areas of Mistley, Manningtree and Lawford, there'll be about 8,000 residents who will be more than 10 kilometres away from an open police station. And I understand that was the benchmark set in 2011. You did say earlier that the benchmark is now 95% of the population within 10 kilometres. And I think Martin was just looking for confirmation of what the new standard was.
This is trying to make sure that there is a policing presence, usually a good challenge from the PCC, usually within the district. The 90-odd% will be within 10 miles, and there will be some that don't. And that is not ideal, but we cannot cover the whole county the whole time. If you look north of Braintree, that's probably, that and Harwich are one of the biggest areas. So making sure that my officers signpost where they're having community meetings, getting engaged when they possibly can, will be key. But we cannot afford to keep all of those stations open.
There are two questions here. Madam.
Caroline Mays, I live in Malden. You're leaving us open. I rang 999. I didn't take it lightly, but I rang it regarding a vulnerable young adult, 19, who'd been assaulted. He had no telephone on him, and then he decided he was going to walk the 5 miles home on a towpath, an unlit towpath. When I rang 999, I waited 4 minutes to be connected. The operator, I don't know where the operations are now based, just told me to hold on the line, hold on the line. I was then told, when the police finally did arrive, some 20 minutes later, to ring 101 if I wanted to contact them. What a waste of time.
I'm not going to try and justify individual incidents, Commissioner. There are times that, we sit here and we talk about it. We don't talk about the officers who grab people coming off bridges. We don't get it into the media. This makes it sound as though Essex Police is failing left, right and centre. I'm hugely proud of what my officers and staff do on a daily basis, and I will not use austerity to defend poor services like that.
Please could I add, before you go any further, this is no criticism of the police service, because the 2 officers that turned up were fantastic. They were exemplary. They did everything. It was the actual ringing and reporting of the initial call that was concerning. 4 minutes to actually be connected. That was the point.
You will not hear me using austerity to justify that. I've invested, I've recruited people to go in there. They've actually been feeling pretty devalued at our force control room because they haven't been given a lot of interest. Some of them are new into those roles. But my expectation is that senior leaders in there have got the right people, the right numbers on duty, and you should not be kept waiting for 4 minutes on a 999 call. So we must pick those up more effectively.
If I could add the comment, so what is my office for? One of the things we do is monitor, all of those things are monitored. It's incredibly unusual that the response time for 999 calls is almost always within seconds, and we check the data monthly on 999 calls, so I think something really exceptional would have happened. Lindsay's notes past me is that all calls are answered within 20 seconds. Now,
it was answered immediately,
right.
However, it was not able to connect to the control room of Essex Police. That was the problem.
I check those daily. Literally the first thing I do each morning is read those figures, so it does interest us.
It's probably something between those calls are answered by BT. When you dial 999, it goes to a BT call centre. So something between that BT call centre and the police control room, which is very, very unusual to hear that, but I'm sorry it happened. Another question at the back. Madam.
Good evening. Member of the public, basically. Can I just ask you something? Are we in danger in the police service of getting top-heavy? Inspector of constabulary, chief constable and a PCC. I would like to know what the cost of your office is overall, including salaries, pensions and all the other things that you're putting into the pot, and whether or not we would be better with the PCSOs and the police officers on the beat. I'm not criticising you personally, because it's a process that's going through, but your office is up for election, I think, next year. And I would like to ask whether there will be a possibility on the voting form to put none of these people, we don't need a PCC, because I don't think we do, basically. I'd sooner have more police officers, and I'm the mother of a police officer and the mother-in-law of another one, and I know how hard they work.
Thank you. Well, let me take a head on. We publish all the information about the office. Our office costs almost exactly the same. I think actually still perhaps a fraction less, but give or take exactly the same as the old police authority. So there's been no... And remember, I replaced the old police authority. And I'm not sure how often you saw them, how often they were down here engaging with you, you giving the chance to answer questions. I went to every police authority meeting for a year before I was elected. There was only on 2 occasions was anybody else there. Once there was another candidate for PCC, and once there was a journalist. You know, we've brought all of this into the public to enable you to engage and have influence. So my office costs the same as the old police authority. It costs about £1.1 million in total, including all of the salaries and all our expenses. We have grown, our office has grown some new responsibilities, but they're funded by the Ministry of Justice on special grants. So we have people at the moment doing 1-year projects with Ministry of Justice money. You have to make your own judgments about whether you think it's worth having public governance that we're trying to bring to it. And my role both to challenge and support the Chief Constable to be as good as he can be, or whether you want invisible governance. There has to be something. But it won't go on if on a voting sheet. You can always just spoil it, or just say, you know, just not or not vote, or just spoil a paper. No, and more will vote. So the question was, people didn't vote last time, and I think that they didn't. Unambiguously, they didn't. Is there interest in our role? I would say that there probably is. I've tried to make myself continuously available. You probably get fed up of hearing me on the radio. My wife does. You probably get fed up of seeing me in the papers. But I think the debate about policing ought to be public, and I've tried to make it public and tried to make sure that you understand what we're doing. And it's not just this. We've completely transformed how victim services are commissioned. The money that we've sponsored right around the county, really good initiatives at local level, which are seeking to reduce demand on officers like your children. And I do understand that the concern about that, but I believe in governance. I think it's much better that you're available, that you can vote for that person. Okay, I'm not standing again, so you can't vote me out, and I accept that, you know, that's a challenge to the system. But what I absolutely wouldn't want to go back to the old days of a police authority in smoke, an invisible police authority in smoke-filled rooms that you had no control over and no visibility of.
Just in relation to Essex Police, compared to similar forces, we have the lowest back office costs, we have the lowest finance, we have the lowest HR, we have the lowest training. I've reduced the chief officers from 4 to 3. The number of superintending ranks has halved in the last 2.5 years, from 42 to 21. I think there are more that I can take out in terms of sergeant and inspecting ranks, but you're absolutely right. My commitment has got to be about making sure we have a maximum number of officers with the right skills on the street. And, you know, I think in due course, by 2020, will each of the eastern regions have their own chief constable? No, I don't think they probably will. We'll probably end up with a chief for the eastern region, because I don't think we can afford the current arrangements. Sir.
Good evening. I'm a neighbourhood watch coordinator for several roads in Southend. My residents want to know, with all these cuts of PCSOs, will the cycling and the officers that actually walk around at the moment, will they still be doing would there be any officers and PCs still walking around?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to hold it just for a second, because we're going to come on to that point, I think, more or less now. If there aren't more questions about this, there's a question about estates here, but I'm not going to lose it, because we're going to come straight back to it in just a second. It's really important, at the heart of local policing.
Thank you. I'll keep my question brief. Councillor Terry again. I see the station issue, the state issue, as an accessibility thing. Now, you said at the start of your talking that 80% of people are happy with 101, but every area meeting I go to, everyone says it's terrible, 101. And also, we've heard tonight a number of examples where people have complained about responses. What really concerns me greatly is that everything you do and all the plans the government has is based on recorded crime. Now, I know that people are not. It's not a matter of losing confidence. I think Essex Police are brilliant, and I've got 100% confidence in what the police do individually. I'm not here to criticise that. But drilling down into this, I don't believe that crime has been recorded effectively and properly anymore, not because of anything you're doing, but because of the system, and that's clearly evident from all the local community meetings I attend. People are just saying, I don't bother to call anymore, because you hang on 101 and in the end you lose the will to live when they say you're number 10 in the queue and put the phone down. How do you respond to that? Because you contradicted yourself. You said 80% of people approve of 101 when you started. Then you said every meeting you attend, people complain about 101.
Okay, I think I was making exactly the same point. So in terms of confidence in policing, unlike most police forces, we independently poll, using an independent firm to poll satisfaction with policing. So the data that we have on how satisfied people are with Essex Police comes from an independent source. The figures for satisfaction in contact with the police is over 80%. Somebody might give the figure, but and that includes the 101 service. So my point, though, is that because in terms of contact with the police, there are over 1 million calls a year. I think it's over 1 million calls a year. So if 80% are satisfied, and let's be clear about this. When I talk over as PCC, the Chief Constable, not Mr. Kavanagh, but his predecessor, said 101 is brilliant. It's over 80% of people are satisfied with it. And I did what you did and said, yeah, that means that 200,000 people aren't, or 200,000 calls, because they're not necessarily different people. And it's a bit like response times. The figure at the time was, and it's gone down, I'm sad to say, but in terms of response to 999 calls, police officers arriving on the scene within the target time, which was 15 minutes for urban and 20 minutes for rural, I think. It was 90% were satisfied. Yeah, but what about the 10%? If you're being burgled in a farmhouse and it takes a long time for the cops to come, that's what they should focus on, not the fact that 90% of the people are satisfied. So we've turned some of that thinking around in the command team, saying let's not focus on the things that's good. Let's celebrate it, but let's focus on what's not good. And I think I've been absolutely consistent about that. In terms of recording of crime, it really matters. And of course, if people don't report, then what can we do? Every single meeting I go to, I hear the same. People saying, I've given up phoning the police. So the reliable data, and the Home Office are really concerned about this. There are two things to say. I'll make it brief. The first is the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which has nothing to do with the police. It's done by the National Office of National Statistics, and it shows you how a much truer level of crime, much higher than reported crime. Which has always been the case. We've always known that. So the Crime Survey England and Wales shows you a much better indicator of what's really happening. It's always been above recorded crime. The really good news is the gap between the two was closed. They've always tracked each other exactly. They've now closed, so it shows that more people are reporting crime now than before. I think that's driven by domestic violence and serious sexual offences, because there's horrible underreporting of that previously. The second thing to say is that last year, there was a major review by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary about the accuracy of police reporting. Essex Police were the second best in England and Wales at 91%. The highest was Dyfed-Powys, I think, at 92%. The lowest was Greater Manchester at 60%. In Greater Manchester, 4 out of 10 crimes were not being properly recorded. In Essex, it was 9 out of 100 were not being properly recorded. Second best in the country. We must, please, and spread the word. Those of you who are counsellors, those of you who are neighbourhood watch, it may be painful for 20% of the people, it may be painful reporting it, but please report crime, because without that, our officers don't stand a chance in responding to what's going on. It may be they don't, and particularly things like antisocial behaviour. They're not going to come out if somebody kicks a fence panel down. If every Friday night it happens, and if the person who lives there is a vulnerable person, then they will take notice. But if we don't tell them, they won't stand a chance. Shall we move on to local policing? Time is against us. Sorry.
As Terry, there is no satisfaction with mediocrity or poor service. If you speak to the Chief Superintendent and the Superintendent in charge of that, The number of conversations I've had with them and their line manager in the recent months, trying to push this, trying to get it better. We're not sitting back on our laurels. We are trying to recognise how that 101 can be more effective.
So we should move on to local policing if we may. Can I just take another show of hands of those who've still got questions to ask? Different ones? Okay, still several. Okay, so we'll try and move at a little bit of speed through local policing, although it's very important. So the PCSOs are perhaps one of the key things of concern. Their concern, I know to the Chief Counsellor, of concern to me. I've met many around the county. I deeply respect what they do. But there's no doubt that that's going to be an area of challenge. But Chief Constable, why don't you introduce the local policing proposals?
Yes, what I am not going to try, and the Neighbourhood Watch Coordinator will come to in a moment, whether it's Tony the specials teams, whether it's Neighbourhood Watch coordinators, whether it's councillors who support the public safety angle, we cannot do this without your support. And the fact that you are frustrated and disappointed and feeling let down because the changing way that we are doing things, we mustn't let this come between us, because actually why we are as successful as we are is because of people like you in this room coming forward. It's interesting, just as a quick anecdote, having been told to speed up, but on Monday morning I was sitting there with the Police and Crime Commissioner next to me. I had Her Majesty's Inspectorate and Constabulary sitting to my right, and the Commissioner for the Independent Police Complaints Commission in front of me. And, you know, apparently I'm not held to account sufficiently. I tell you what, on Monday morning I felt bloody well held to account. In terms of local policing proposals, what we are having to do is try and keep warranted officers available on the streets to make sure those powers are available. So if there is a change in the public order, like we had those awful circumstances in August 2011, whether we have the set of circumstances we saw in Colchester, I have warranted officers I can move around the county to keep you safe. That meant that we've got proposals around some very good PCSOs and reductions in numbers. What we are therefore going to do is try and empower those local district commanders with their local responsibility to say what can they do with their local partners in making a hub where they get people who know what the local problems are and do better problem solving. We can't do the random patrols in the way that we used to. We've seen where we put right people in the right place. We called it Operation Insight. 2 years of significant reduction in burglary across the county, really pleasing. So we can put people in the right place with the right information. We're doing it in Colchester, we're doing it in Chelmsford tonight because of specific incidents. But what I want to be able to do is, you've got Chief Superintendent Colliston here, and you've got Leslie as well, who's the district commander. I want to empower them to actually say, what do you know that you can do locally with your local partners and your local hubs? And it might be, if we can get a microphone, we have a little listen to what might be going on locally. Would that be all right? Chief Inspector Leslie Ford, everybody, you probably know her.
Thank you very much. Leslie Ford, District Commander for Rochford and Castle Point. I just want to say really that I'm very passionate about ensuring that my officers continue to engage with the local community and actually reach out to solve the problems in an innovative way as we go forward. And these are very, very challenging proposals that are on the table at the moment for us to consider. To reassure you that we're already looking at real opportunities to engage with the community and actually look at community solutions. So, for example, my inspector has, together with Castle Point District Council, actually brought about the initiative of active citizens, and we've actually enrolled individuals who have gone through the data barring service checks, so they're safe, and they can actually support our local officers down in Castle Point by providing extra eyes and ears to actually look at those issues that are causing problems. We're very committed around issues in Rayleigh, Rochford, around the nighttime economy, around the antisocial behaviour issues that we've actually had reported of late. So, for example, using the PCC's funding options through the Community Safety Partnership, we've actually won money to actually support a taxi marshal opportunity. So we're now actually providing individuals, again, who are out there. We're looking at opportunities around a pastor scheme together with the faith community to provide people who can help us in those local patrols around the Rayleigh High Street to make our high street safe as people actually enjoy their nights out, so that we can get people sort of through the high street in the night time and actually home safely as well. We've had Operation Wishbone operating through the year as well in Rochford, and as some of you may be aware, we've had a few issues with youth nuisance and antisocial behaviour in the Rochford area. And to pick up on somebody's point earlier, my community policing officers have been really active. They've been out on their bikes in the Rochford district, and that is absolutely something I want to see them continuing to do, extending their reach whilst they're out in the community. We've got fantastic working relationships with both district councils, both at Rochford and Castle Point, and they're really keen to engage with us in the community safety problem solving partnership hub, which will be most likely held at Rayleigh Police Station. I engage with Graham Brown around antisocial behaviour issues, as do my staff, and we're looking at opportunities to invoke powers under the antisocial behaviour that was invoked last year, so that we can again look at new opportunities to keep people safe, identifying the threat, harm and the risk, those individuals that are most vulnerable, and reducing those impacts on quality of life issues within the community. So I'm very, very keen that I pick up and respond to the priorities of Essex Police while continue that really good work in the community, engaging with people like Joe around community safety accredited individuals, looking at park rangers and those individuals who within their normal workspace can also provide that really important link back to Essex Police, so they can keep us informed where perhaps we haven't got the reach of our constables where we might have had. But I'm looking at the flexibility across both districts to ensure that we appropriately respond to and deal with those issues as well as we possibly can.
Chief Inspector Ford, Leslie, thank you for that. Either for you or for the Chief Constable. What I've found is there's often confusion about how the community policing team and the neighbourhood policing teams, your officers of the 24/7 response. I don't know, Chief Constable, whether you or Leslie want to deal with what that looks like overall, because there's a rich tapestry of policing behind this, isn't there? So that's point one. And point two, and to press you a little bit, perhaps after we've done that context, as you lose a significant number of PCSOs, how tough is it going to be?
I'll set a little bit of context and then give it back to Leslie. It's interesting we talk about this. All of those specialists, the dogs, the roads officers, the specialist detectives, the local detectives, are also there in communities keeping you safe. And we always talk about the bobbies on the beat and the PCSOs. They are the tip of the spear, but actually there's an enormous amount of policing skill and commitment that goes on behind that doesn't necessarily get seen. In terms of the scale of the challenge, you don't take out 190 PCSOs without a shift in what it feels like for local communities. And I'm not going to patronise the people in this room. So therefore, what we're trying to do, and we've got a Chief Inspector locally based who's going to work with someone from your office and the District Commander to say, what do those local hubs look like? So you've got one inspector, you've got two sergeants, you've got the number of PCSOs that are left and police constables. How are they going to work with those local groups to make sure they have the maximum possible effect? And we're still designing them. But Leslie, what would you see happening locally around how we're going to use local partnerships and those resources to keep communities safe and engaged?
I think that we'll be continuing to increase that partnership working and stakeholder working together with the district councils, because I think they hold a great deal of resource that we can actually utilise together and ensure that actually we maximise the effectiveness of our combined resource. Clearly, for me, yes, there will be a reduced resource to what I have now in terms of those community policing teams, but certainly, Commissioner, I will retain, and obviously across the force, that 24/7 response policing opportunities, so they will be responding to intelligence and those incidents that come through. But I certainly see the local district liaisons. I think there's fantastic opportunities around other partners, and I think Essex Fire and Rescue Service were mentioned earlier. Also picking up on that community safety around the sort of voluntary sector, CAVs and RAVs, so the voluntary sector at Castle Point and Rayleigh are also important in how we can actually reach out to those people that might be more vulnerable in our community. And I would like to see them very much embedded within our partnership problem-solving hub, either virtually or physically, so that we can have those discussions and those liaisons to challenge or meet those challenges head-on.
Thank you. Now, we could go on talking too long about this, and I'd rather throw it to you to ask questions, because this is the heart of what affects the communities. So there's some questions from some others, perhaps who haven't asked before. There are 2 or 3 here, just if we may.
Yeah, thanks. It's Jack Baldock, a long-standing Rayleigh resident. One of the things I want to, I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible, but I'm very keen on seeing high visibility policing, which obviously today we don't see enough of. That's my view. And I just wondered, with Essex being split up into 10 separate districts, and put into one side the volume of manpower, and I know I shouldn't say man before power nowadays, but you take away headquarters staff, you take away traffic department, you take away CID, you take away specialised departments, what actual figure does that leave a district commander on each of these 10 districts? And my question then is, as regards visibility policing, and I'm not talking about cardboard cutouts, which we actually are now seeing in Rayleigh. There was one in a store in Rayleigh, I noticed, in the shop window the other day. I'm talking about proper police officers being visibly recognised in the society and the community, which we don't seem to be getting. Now, as I say, going back to my question, how many officers has each district commander got to devolve these responsibility to? And could we not go back to an old system which was in the 60s, or at least research an old system in the 60s, which was called an area beat system, where a area was split up into X separate sections, and a police officer was given a responsibility for that particular section to work it on a 24-hour basis, working what he considered were the appropriate hours on that beat.
Okay.
I'm going to stop now, don't worry. But I could go on about this subject for a long while. But it is to do with visibility, a higher visibility of police officers. We're not seeing them on the street. You don't see them in Rayleigh Town Centre.
Yeah.
I go into Southend quite a lot.
I think we've got the... Can I cut you? Because we've got the drift of the question. So, and I'll pass it to Chief Constable to talk about the professional policing. My first 2 things, and this is a serious point, about the cardboard cutout. In fact, my wife saw one the other day. They approved to work shoplifting in shops where there... Now, think what you like about it. It might be bonkers, but shops where there are cardboard cutouts, shoplifting reduces. Bonkers, isn't it? But it's true. The second thing about the bobbers on the beat, I think we need to reflect back about the crime types that we talked about. You know, child abuse, serious sexual offences, online frauds. These things are not solved by bobbers on the beat. And they are the crime types that are doing a lot of harm. But I take the point about visibility, and I think all of us, you know, reflect back to a time when perhaps you imagined you saw police officers. I just don't know. But the professional point of view, Chief Constable, has to be yours, really.
Mr. Baldock, I've been in policing since 1985. I don't go back to the 60s. Lived in the county since the 60s. Now, you can't take out 600 officers from Essex Police and already 250 PCSOs and try and improve the way we deal with child abuse and domestic abuse without having a reduction somewhere. Now, I'm not going to patronise you. I can't have beat bobbies designated to individual areas. The village I used to live in, just outside Brentwood, used to have 4 PCSOs dedicated to it. They were seen all the time. They engaged with my wife's business. The local businesses loved it. They went down to 2. They then went down to 1. They then went down to 1 PCSO covering 4 or 5 villages. You're absolutely right about the levels of visibility, and I understand that concern. In terms of the numbers that each of the districts have locally and what they've got in charge, I've given Luke, who's the Chief Superintendent for the whole of the south of the county, a bit of time to think about it. You've got a number of... And what we do have is the lady from Malden, they will have... Chelmsford and Malden have got... Well, Malden have got less than Chelmsford. Southend has got more than... Sorry? Oh, you do. And actually, following the recent change of the shift pattern, you're one of the uplifts in terms of having more people actually about. That's the front counter. They're out there all the time. So, Luke, in terms of the numbers...
I mean, it's very difficult. I'm sorry, Luke Collison, I'm the area commander for the south of Essex, covering Southend, Castle Point, Rochford and Basildon. It's very difficult to give an exact figure, but roughly speaking, for those 4 local authorities, I have in the region of 500 officers, roughly speaking around 350 who are in uniform and about 150 who would be in investigative plainclothes roles. In terms of the district we're in tonight, Castle Point and Rochford, as a result of the proposals going forward, there will be a slight modest increase going, if the proposals are agreed, in April. But also, as the Chief and the PCC have alluded to, it's not just about visible patrols, and I'm really delighted to announce that in Rayleigh Police Station in the next few weeks we're hoping to launch a demonstrator trial of co-locating for the first time in Essex Police's history 3 groups of very important dedicated officers, and they are our child abuse officers, our child abuse investigation officers, our sexual abuse investigation officers and our domestic abuse investigation officers, and they'll be co-located in Rayleigh Police Station, working together, most importantly working within your local policing team. So the opportunities to share information. Leslie touched on the new community hub, which will be up and running very soon, and I certainly see massive opportunity for data sharing, for co-location, for really getting our heads together and dealing with the biggest and most serious vulnerabilities in the community very, very effectively. And one more thing, Chief, if I can. I want to commend the approach that Leslie and partners have made in Rayleigh and Watford Council area. We were at a council meeting a few nights ago where we were talking through lots of what you've heard tonight, and I've been absolutely amazed by the support by Watford District Council to look at the leadership that sits behind all this, to look at the strategy and the joint planning that goes behind all of this, and certainly looking at Rochford in comparison to and Rayleigh in comparison to other parts of the county. I've been really amazed by the level of energy and desire to take all of this head on.
While you're on your feet, if you don't mind, Mr. Nicholson, the question about foot patrols, I think we're more or less into it. I mean, is there going to be any place for foot patrolling, or only when there are problems? The impression I've got is that foot patrols will be used where it's known that there's going to be a problem. Is that right, or is there going to be nothing, or how will it work?
I think, well, I don't think I know that going forward we will only be putting in foot patrols where they're targeted, with the analysis, which we're very good at these days. We have a massive, well not massive, but a reasonably significant industry at headquarters that looks at crime trends, looks at crime types, looks at intelligence and mashes all that together to come up with really directed, well-informed patrols. And where our officers have time, which isn't always the case, but where they have time through a well-embedded tasking process that people like Leslie and myself will get involved in, we're able to task very specifically officers, specials, volunteers to those areas where those patrols will make the biggest difference. So only really where we were able to, based on evidence.
There was another question here. Thank you.
Hiya, I'm Chris from Wickford. Since the PCSOs, we've had them in Wickford, crime rate has actually gone down. Is it going to go up a terrific amount once they've actually all gone? Because as far as I can make out at the moment, most of the PCSOs, what we are allotted, will be actually based at Basildon Police Station rather than in Wickford itself. And at the moment, we're having problems with crime and drugs at the moment, where when we're phoning the drugs problem in, where we do have a lot of problems around where I live, the police aren't wanting to know. And on one case, there was drug being dealings, and a person who I know from previous working in security was known to carry weapons, and the police didn't even attend, and that was on a 999 call.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry to hear that. Was that quite recently?
Yes, that was recently, and I didn't even get the option, even though I said I would write a written statement out for it. A police officer didn't even attend.
Okay, thank you. Chief Constable.
I'm sure Chief Inspector Ford and Chief Superintendent Collison will want to pick that up with you, because it comes back to Councillor Terry's point. If there are times, I would much rather my officers say, we have actually got 3 road accidents at the moment, we've got petrol spillages, we are not going to get to you today, and you'd actually turn around and go, thanks for letting me know. It's sometimes my people have got to be able to give difficult messages, they can't get to everything all the time. And I just think what you are doing by having the level of interest and commitment you've got is key to us going forward. Do I think that crime is immediately going to go up because we don't have PCSOs? No. My concern is people feel more vulnerable. I've been out on patrol with lots of my PCSOs who go and visit some of our most vulnerable people in communities who are lonely, who are vulnerable to bullies, thugs, predators coming in, moving in. So as we have to make these decisions, and they're not decisions that are being made lightly, they try and keep warranted officers on the street and to make sure that I come within budget. I'm not like the health service, I can't overspend. I must try and come within my budget that I'm provided, is that we provide alternative. The risk is crime is going up in other ways, on the internet, child abuse and those things that we've discussed. I've got to make sure that we deal with those as well. And I'm going to say to you, 2 years, we've had 600 less officers, 250 less PCSOs. I'm not going to tell you, as the Chief Constable of this brilliant force after 175 years, that we are going to hell in a handcart. We're not. You've got a proud bunch of people who you're listening to who are managing really difficult situations proudly and doing their best with what they get given. But you keep reporting the crime, we understand it, and I will keep talking to the politicians, the PCC and the MPs about where the strain is taking place within the force. I can't guarantee anything around where crime will be and what it's going to take place. I do know the greatest harm has got to be managed better than it is at the moment, and reports are going to come out shortly to say Essex Police needs to be better in the way that it manages rape and child abuse, and I've got to make sure that's done well. We'll keep talking to you. I can't guarantee. I'm not going to sit here and say to you, crime's definitely not going to go up over the next few years. I'm hoping it won't, but we'll need to wait and see.
Conscious of time, there are 4 hands went up. So could we take these 2 questions together
I'll do it
and
very
then we'll
quick.
go to those 2?
I'll do it quickly. I am absolutely juxtaposed to the loss of officers, and I will be campaigning for a referendum. Do you agree that it would be morally and ethically far better to set the budget but delay your plans and allow the new PCC, whoever that may be, to decide on what should be done and leave open the option for a referendum on the precept, a referendum that you have denied us, a referendum I believe the people of Essex would support because we want the officers on the beat.
Okay, let's take the second question as well, then we'll answer those 2.
Thank you. To the Chief, please. I am aware that if you have, say, 4 arrests on one evening, say in the nighttime economy, and you've got 4 crews taking 4 arrested people to the cells, that those crews of the cars are in the police station with the arrested person until they are registered and put away. Can you confirm if this is true or not true?
Shall I take my question first? So the question to me was, should we delay any plans for next year until the new PCC comes along? Well, I have to set a budget in January. I have no option. I have a legal duty to set a budget in option. It takes effect from the beginning of April. I have to raise next year's council tax based on that budget. So I have no legal option to do that at all. Sorry. Chief.
The reality is, and it goes right back to when I joined the police, if you have an arrest, you have to go in, you have to give your evidence. I've had a half dozen arrests since I've been the Chief Constable of this county, for drugs, for assaults, for burglary, public order offences. I'm out there trying to understand. And when I take the prisoner into the custody, I don't jump the queue. I sit there and wait to get booked in, and I've waited for 45 minutes. And my officers will tell me, boss, that was still quick. They've waited for hours to book in. It's getting more difficult. We're reducing the number of custody locations across the county, probably down to 5 for the whole county, because the way that we need to structure them, the Home Office demands about the number of cells, the quality of the digital investigation, there's going to be less. So you're right, when officers have arrests, they do get taken off the streets. The intention is that we get those custody arenas more efficient, more effective, body-worn cameras, people plead guilty more quickly, and we make it more efficient. But yes, they do get taken off the streets.
2 more questions, 1 or 2. Let's take them together if we may. So.
Right. I know that you want more warranted officers on the streets. I'm sure you've still got warranted officers that are sitting there in offices that haven't arrested anyone for over 5 years. And to that end, maybe there is a call for proportionality with regard to using PCSOs on the ground floor for intelligence purposes. The intelligence purposes provide the analysis whereby they can get the people to go to the correct areas to cover them when you do get problems. Now, with regard to you wanting the warranted officers, you've already stated that should you get an increase in money, that would be where it would go first. My question to you is, how do we personally go about getting external funding to keep PCSOs if we want to, bearing in mind that it's all been scheduled to coincide with the new financial year?
And we'll take the other question as well, just in the interest of... Yeah, don't worry.
Thank you. Some things have just occurred to me where you're talking about abuse cases. Should it not be up to social services to intervene in some of those rather than qualified police some of the time? I don't know if that's the case. But secondly, I am an active citizen, as Leslie Ford just mentioned. I applied in May, and I've had an article in the paper, I've had a couple of letters in the Echo to try and encourage more people to join that, to put feet on the streets. Since I joined in May, I was appointed last week for the first time. I've done 2 hours of leaflet distribution. Now, I'm anxious to do more for the community. How is this active citizen role working, and what more can I do for the community?
Thank you. I'll go to the Chief in a moment to talk about warranted officers and also the risk of loss of intelligence. I think they're very important points. In terms of additional funding, there are various things that are being tried around the country. You know, speeding fines, that's not allowed actually. Advertising on cars. I don't want to see Essex police cars going around with McDonald's signs on the side or whatever. I just don't think it's right. Some PCSOs are funded by councils. It will remain an option for councils to fund PCSOs. Frinton and Walton, just about the safest place in Essex. They pay for, the Frinton and Walton Town Council pay £200,000 a year for 6 PCSOs. 1 or 2 other councils pay for PCSOs. I think that remains an option. The Chief Constable has said he will allow, he's prepared to allow that. I think it's not a bad idea. It's something for councils to think about. If there are other sources of funding, please let me know if anyone's got any good ideas. In terms of social services and partner agencies, you mentioned social services. I think we might talk about mental health as well in the Mental Health Trust. Well over 20% of all Essex Police time is spent dealing with people in mental health crisis. And mental health are just about to reduce their provision of facilities across the county. This is really challenging, and I think we do need to do some really joined up work between the departments. The question is, where does the leadership for that come from? And I'm finding that quite challenging. We're looking at the opportunities for devolution, particularly with mental health. If we're saying, let's let all of us who live in Essex, Southend and Thurrock get on with working out how we govern ourselves better, perhaps we could spend that money in social care, in health. It's an opportunity for the hubs, it's an opportunity for us at county leadership level as well, and it's one that we're very, very actively exploring. But Chief Constable, the point about warranted officers against PCSOs, lots of intelligence, and also officers sitting in back rooms, doing paperwork. I mean, how real is that?
I think our colleagues said he's an ex-officer and he knows that takes place. I've invested quite heavily into an improvement team that targets officers who need to improve their delivery, whose sickness is not right, who we need to get back on the front line. I'm really proud 97.5% of the officers who've done the fitness tests are now through it. The question for us is then, do we need to raise the bar? I think it's been really good to see the way the officers have pulled together to try and make sure that they all get through that as much as they can. What you're highlighting around the PCSOs is a concern to me. Because they are connected to their local community, because they have people's confidence, because they have those conversations, they submit a lot of intelligence, more than my officers do. And we are going to need to fill that gap. And the gentleman I'm going to come back to your workforce model. The gentleman who's the active citizen, I'm going to give Chief Inspector Ford full authority to hound you now to get as much out of you as we possibly can, because that's what will make such a difference. And thank you for wanting to volunteer in that way. It's really important. Active citizens, street pastors, the specials are just the backbone of some of the best response that we do. My officers on the response teams don't understand, no mention tonight of rural crime. Rural crime is causing, particularly the north of the county, some parts of the south, immense concerns. Expensive bits of machinery going, officers not understanding what hair coursing means when it causes tens of thousands of pounds to crops, all sorts of things that we need to work with street pastors and to get the community messaging right. I think you're absolutely right. I'm pushing the officers as hard as possible. They either need to use their warranted powers, or I need to understand why they're staying with us. I think that's an important part of it. We are putting civilian investigators into the child abuse team to try and keep the costs down. But I need to understand, I said to the Commissioner when I first arrived in force, I did not want to go below 3,000 officers. We are now below 3,000 officers. But I need to make sure that as we build this model, there's sufficient resilience that when that bad day comes, I suspect looking at your age, you were there in 11 when everything was going so difficult for London and the other major cities, that we can respond to that in a way that the public feels there is a level of professionalism in crises. So yes, we've got to be tougher on those who don't think they can use those warranted powers anymore. Yes, we've got to get civilian investigators in. But yes, we're going to have to fill that gap around the intelligence that will be missing as the PCSOs reduced.
There's a question over here and another one here. My observation about using the PCSOs for intelligence is this really, that of course somebody has seen the PCSO and the PCSO has talked to somebody and passed that information. That's been fantastically valuable. But, in this day and age, I look at my children, the way they lead their lives, they're more in contact with their friends than they've ever been in the past. They use Facebook. They're really closely in touch with, they share all sorts of amazing information they share, now. Now, I'm not suggesting we should share sensitive information online, but if we get the technology right, if there's a simple app which does enable you to send that bit of information through to the police, and that you get a courteous response and that it's going to make a difference, I think it's the way that we can change it. And I think young people will do this. Well, you're shaking your head. I think young people will, and I think they want to.
Share the information, but then that's all got to be vetted and tested to find out whether it's true or not. As opposed to a PCSO that goes round and gets to speak to someone in confidence that knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah, good point. But I think there will be, I still think that there is the opportunity to gather a lot more information about what's going on in the community, about people's concerns. Crime Stoppers, for example, is a wonderful, wonderful system. Crime Stoppers solve some of the most important crimes. And I think if we can have something that's similar but direct into Essex Police, that Essex Police enables them to look at that information, I think it has to be a new model. We have to try it, and we must embrace that technology. There was a question from another gentleman, sir.
Yes, my question is more about relationship. What you're talking about is intelligence. You're talking about people meeting, people calling in, but you police us with our consent. You police us by having a relationship with us. And what you're becoming is God in a box. You will, on some occasions, turn up, and on other occasions you won't. You will not relate with us. You will not meet with us. You not think, this is great. But on a day-to-day basis, what you're talking about is making it difficult for there to be a relationship, which in turn is going to mean if there's no relationship, there is no intelligence, and there is no actual putting in. On the other hand, what you're saying is if people then start to take things into their own hands, they're a vigilante. So we're getting the worst of all worlds.
I think it's a very well-made point, but there will still be a community policing team in each of the districts, and it seems to me that the most important thing that they will do is relate to the communities. It will feel different, but I guess that's your ambition for those teams.
At the beginning of the week, I was sitting there with the HMI, the PCC and the IPCC held to account, and tonight listening to your concerns, and I think your point is well made. Without the relationship, the greatest strength of British policing is we police with communities, not at them. And when I joined policing in 1985, it was a response-based model, and suddenly we had this introduction of PCSOs. Everyone said they were plastic bobbies. The Daily Mail went on their rant about how awful they were. I've seen some incredible work, and you're right, how we keep some type of relationship going and some type of trust going will be key. But I won't step back from vigilantism.
I think there have to be the last two questions, the gentleman there and the gentleman here. None of us are rushing away afterwards. We can stay and carry on, but the last two questions together, if we may.
Just a question I'd like to raise is council rates. If we, in the next year, manage to raise £2 million, we can have probably another 30 PCSOs on the beat in Southend and round Essex, and maybe 10 police officers. Because I don't agree with all these cuts that the actual service is going to be better. But if it went wrong and crime actually went up, what's going to happen next?
And the other question?
Excuse me. It just appears to me, and particularly from what the gentleman over there was asking just now, that we're now into reactive policing as opposed to proactive policing, which was often the case in the past. So under these circumstances, I hate to be the voice of doom and despondency, but what's come out of this meeting here tonight for me is that that's exactly what it is, reactive policing. The intelligence won't be forthcoming. And I'm very concerned with that.
Yeah.
As one of the older generations, what's happening to this country at the moment, we're flooded with it. We are relying on first-class intelligence, which we're not going to get on a local basis, so we're going to have to rely on our specialised departments to get this. I'm sorry if I'm making that sound all moving, but I think that's the case. It's reactive policing and not proactive.
I'll ask Chief Hunter to take it.
Can I just be clear? There is a problem around the PCSOs. There is a brilliant system that is beginning to come alive for us called Athena. Now, what's happening is we've just gone live with Suffolk and Norfolk as well. So suddenly, my officers in the north of the county are suddenly seeing people who are travelling across that Suffolk border to commit burglary, sex offences, and we're beginning those officers in the north of the county are having those relationships. It's going to happen more broadly. We need, and actually, the ability to put my name in and suddenly see the car that I drive, the people I associate with, when I was last arrested, the photograph that I was taken, the case papers for the matter I was last, that's all coming together for the first time. So my officers need to take more responsibility about getting the intelligence on, not thinking it's someone else's job, the good old PCSO will do it. So you're right in a way, PCSOs will leave a gap, but the system is dramatically better than it has been, and it's now linking across counties. The example that the police and crime, can we just really focus on this, everyone? I don't think we've got the message across. The gentleman just said if we get £2 million, we'll have another 30 PCSOs. We have got to find between 50 and 63 million pounds. If we get another £2 million, it's how much less savings I will have to find. It's not that we're going to get more. We've got to come to terms with the scale of the change in the way that policing is being funded. If we get a precept that increases us by £10 million, we will still have to find 40 million in savings. It's a very difficult time. Please don't think if we get a precept increase, we're going to have more. It will be that we are having to find less savings. You can fund PCSOs, sorry, yes. Yeah, you could, and that's the key thing I introduced when I became chief. Any funding for PCSOs that takes place, those PCSOs are ring-fenced to those locations. We don't then share them with others or pull them away. They are ring-fenced, and Frinton and others have seen that integrity we try and do with those arrangements.
Sorry, I have to re-up that's always been the case.
No, it hasn't.
No, I'm afraid that they weren't. It didn't happen in practice, which is why the joint funding stopped. We've had a tremendous discussion. You know, these are difficult times. I'm not trying to suggest anything other than that. You know, we have tried to make this debate as open, as public as possible. We listen really carefully, and the conversation like this enables me and the Chief to go away and to continue to ponder what can we do in these difficult circumstances to do the very best for all of us who live in Essex. You know, I reflect, we're going to, you know, next year we will have the same number of police officers as we had in 1999. So it's 16 years ago that we were at those sort of numbers. And I actually went back and looked at the crime figures for that year, and they are exactly the same as the 12 months to the end of September. So there's something sort of symmetrical about that. I don't know where it's going. What we have now, I think, are more professional police officers. I think we have better technology. We have better communications. We're going to have better buildings. It's going to be very tough. I am going to continue to make the case for more funding. I'm going to make the case for a better share of funding for Essex. I'm going to make the case to allow those of us who pay so little through council tax, or the least through council tax, to pay more. I'm going to commit. I have 6 months to run in this role, and I'm going to commit to being as energetic in the last 6 months as I have for the last 3 years. Our programme of engagement will probably look different in the new year. It has to for political reasons, but my office will still be getting the facts out there, and I will be wanting to meet you and hear your views. Could I thank you all for coming this evening? Thank you for being very disciplined with the questions too. They were great. Everybody was very, very good about that. on your behalf, can I thank the Chief Constable for his team and bringing his team here tonight. It's a big investment, but it's an important investment. We've been, actually a decent-sized audience this evening. I hope it'll be very interesting to see how the webcast goes. And for that, and for the arrangements, could I thank the Essex Police technical team who made that film, by the way. We're not spending money, you're not spending your money on that. That was made by our own in-house team. They provided all of the audio-visual tonight. But above all, thank you. Thank you for the debate. Continue to engage with us, please. You know how to reach us, and we'll be as responsive as we can. Chief Constable, thank you and the team very much indeed. Thanks, everybody.